All right. We're beyond what is a sensor, thresholds and notifications, monitoring devices. So the things that you would expect, server hardware, switches, firewalls, routers, system health, things like that. Going back to the example of the iDRAC. So we have a dedicated device for the iDRAC, and we're pulling in system health across that main board. So all the critical metrics for fans, power supplies, temperature status, chassis status, things like that. But we can go deeper than that and monitor the individual physical disks. And the same is true with anything from a Cisco UCS to a ProLiant to an IBM or a chassis or an HP blade. So these are just a couple examples of the different sensors we can use for things like UCS health. So as you can tell, there's multiple metrics, and each one of these are configurable with separate notifications and alerts for the health of that device.
Quick question. What's the story with what looks like a QR code in the upper right-hand corner? Just out of curiosity.
Great question. I don't get that question very often. So what that QR code allows you to do is you could actually put that on a device in your data center and scan it, so then it would bring you right to PRTG to look at the status of that device. So if you just did like a printout or a label with that QR code.
Interesting.
Well, I've worked in too many data centers where you walk in and there's rows of servers, and you have to get to some server by name.
Yeah.
That's it. And where is that?
It's curled up and long enough. Yeah.
Oh, if somebody
you got lucky
was
with a
lucky
label.
and took out the
Yeah.
brother label maker.
And
Yeah.
actually put the label on.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
my favorite are the shops where somebody comes in and puts the labels on the Dell bezels.
Yeah.
And then somebody comes in and takes the bezels off and puts them back on wrong. That's why I now, gear comes into my data center and bezels go immediately in the trash. I don't care what the gear in my data
You
center
don't need it to
looks
be
like.
pretty?
No. I don't need the little Cylon light that goes back and forth depending on how busy the disk array is.
But you may want a QR code now.
But I may want a QR
I like the
code.
QR code.
Well, I hate QR codes, but I like this application.
That's a good idea.
So before we even get to server hardware, though, there's obviously a lot going on in the data center. What's the air temperature, quality, humidity, noise levels? So that comes in with environmental monitoring. Maybe an APC NetBots, maybe another device like a Kentix, or even something we've been recently playing around with, NetAtmo. They make a weather station device. It's more targeted towards your home residential users, but it's kind of a nice use case, especially for switch closets that don't have a monitored HVAC unit. And with a single script, we can take in indoor CO2, noise, temperature, humidity, the Wi-Fi status. So for those areas, the building or maybe the switch closet where you've got devices that you're worried about overheating if the HVAC unit goes down.
So is there a correlation engine so I can only get an alert if all three switches in that closet are claiming something's overheating?
Yes, we have a...
Because any one of them might be a
Have an
local-
issue, yeah. The middle one might not be as happy as the outer two.
Well, I mean,
if you really-
there may be a slow fan, and so that one's running warmer. But if all three devices in that closet are going, it's getting warm in here, then that's an HVAC problem.
Good point. If you didn't want to be notified unless two report it, and this applies to everything, right? So if you've got multiple database, web servers, what have you, and you only want to know when two fail or three fail, that's where the business process sensor comes in. So the business process sensor is an aggregate view of multiple devices and sensors. That allows you to, I mean, your scenario probably wouldn't be as common as the,
No, but if
hey,
I have 10 load-balanced web servers, I really don't want an alert when one fails. When I get down to 7, I'm going to start worrying.
exactly. And that's where the business process sensor comes in. So you set a threshold. So let's say you've got that web service and you're just doing ping. to be simple, or you could be much more granular and be monitoring CPU loads or memory or SQL response times across 8 or 10 different web servers. And you set a threshold based upon the number of sensors or devices you're monitoring within any channel within that business process sensor, so that the overall health of the business process sensor is reflective of that given piece of the process or service or application that you're monitoring. So the common use case is corporate website, e-web shop, something like that, where it's relying upon a load balancer in those database and web servers or switches and firewalls that are at the front end. So great question. You get a t-shirt.
Oh, and I am not left-handed.
If we look at the virtual infrastructure, we can do things like look at the host performance. And unlike some of the other sensors, we're actually using an HTTP-based SOAP protocol to tie directly into vSphere. And we're looking at hardware status. So if a fan, a power supply, something fails on that ESX host, we're going to know about it. Host performance, critical metrics for understanding potential provisioning issues with your individual ESX hosts. CPU ready, of course, CPU usage, data store reads and writes, disk latency, memory consumption, network activity. We can drill down further into the guests at the vCenter level. So if I back out here. So if we're monitoring the vCenter, and this helps to prevent false positives, of course, because if we're monitoring at the host and they vMotion from one host to the next, this will prevent downtime or prevent false positive within PRTG. So we're taking in similar metrics as the host performance. We're monitoring CPU ready, data store reads and writes, CPU usage for each of the guests, as well as monitoring data store provisioning with our data store sensor. So looking at available capacity. I mean, ultimately, when you're monitoring a virtual environment, you want to know when you've got those provisioning issues, when you need to spin up new hardware, when you need to move guests from one host to the next.
Is there a way to change those values from kilobytes to other variables down there at the bottom so that you don't have to do the math in your head, like scroll down?
Yeah, absolutely.
I only care about petabytes.
Yes, the lovely channel unit configuration. So we can, for whatever reason, that was defaulting to kilobytes. So, so we can change that accordingly.
Can I create rate of change alerts? Yeah, I'm worried that the free space in this data store is decreasing too quickly.
Okay.
It's like if the rate of change is more than 5% a week, I want to know about it.
That's a good. You could definitely do that with.
I mean, I could script it.
Exactly.
The question is there something simpler than that? And if there isn't, then put it on the roadmap and decide where.
Rate of change. Yeah, I mean, you definitely have visibility into that, but actually having a notification if it changes 5% in a week or 5% in a day, I mean, that might hit the threshold of unusual detection, and that's you can kind of change the sensitivity on the unusual detection.
Really what I want to do is say this is unusual, especially as we start dealing with organizations that have HCI and Robo. It's like, I'm not going to look at my 100 remote offices. You have to tell me.
Yeah, understood. Good question. I'll definitely take that back because I like it. If nothing else, it's a good exercise.
Well, it brings you to the the VMware stuff I can get from those stats I can get from VMware. And it moves you past just being one place to look to, we're doing some correlation and secondary effects analysis of the data. Sure. Its value.
So moving into some additional metrics within a VMware environment, we can get some granular monitoring for every logical processor using an SNMP CPU load sensor. So you turn on SNMP within that host. We can look at each of the logical processors to see if they're being overutilized, if there's an affinity set for one core. You're going to have the granularity of reporting across all of those logical processors. Again, with PRTG, every sensor, you can dive down into live data, 2 days, 30 days, 365 days, and pull historic data. Now with PRTG, because we're not SQL-based, you can pull historic data however far back you'd like to go. By default, we set the system to a year's worth of raw monitoring data. You could push that up to 3 years. So if you wanted to pull a report or look at historic data in the form of XML or CSV for any sensor, you've got that capability within the reporting portion or historic data. Furthermore, SNMP traffic on a virtual host for monitoring the physical interfaces as well as the virtual switches. So an SNMP traffic sensor is one of those bread and butter sensors for the entire network, for storage arrays, for routers, switches, firewalls, your servers, your virtual environments. An SNMP traffic sensor not only looks at traffic in and out, but we can look at broadcasts and errors, discards, multicast traffic, unicast traffic. So if anything is out of the ordinary, if things are spiking within any of those metrics, you're going to have visibility to it from the virtual switch as well as the physical interface level within those ESX hosts. And kind of moving on from there would be OS monitoring. So we have native sensors for SNMP and SSH to tie into Linux performance monitoring processes, and as well as the ability to script your own sensors using Python. On the Windows side, we can tie into anything using WMI or perf counters. We're going to try to use perf counters for many of the sensors or fall back on WMI for application, service, process, specific performance metrics from a Windows perspective. And a common discussion we have with customers is SNMP versus WMI. Even within a Windows environment, you can still enable SNMP and do the same things you're doing for monitoring memory, CPU load, disk space. Those core kind of metrics for your servers you can do with SNMP, so you save yourself some of the overhead of having all those WMI sensors in place. And kind of building upon that would be event log sensors, specific application sensors for things like Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory replication errors, DHCP monitoring, DNS monitoring. And that could be more of a general thing in terms of ports, monitoring port responses, Windows event logs, as well as historic event logs.